this is really the third time I've seen something where, every molecule of my body is just screaming, this is another just massive opportunity, and how best to take advantage of it. And the way you force multiply yourself usually, in sort of the startup arena, is to raise venture capital, right, and start investing in things to catch a wave. This is the way to raise to catch this wave for Bittensor, right? So straight up, that's why, right? We believe in it and we think it's a very big thing.
The Delta fundamentals have exploded for Bittensor over the last 18 months, but the price hasn't moved. And so one, I think there's going to be a spring back point, and it's going to be volcanic at some point when the world wakes up to what's being built here. Maybe there's a DeepSeek moment within the Bittensor ecosystem, and name your subnet for which candidate that's going to be. At some point, the world is going to wake up to it.
And that I view it as very much like sort of an Ethereum-like phenomenon, and translating that into numbers, that's like 500 billion. Let's say Bitcoin goes to 10 trillion, right? I think then Bittensor at 1 trillion is completely realistic. I don't think that's out of the question. So when Rob came along and we both shared the enthusiasm for Bittensor, and every molecule in his body was screaming, oh my God, this is another Bitcoin. It just really made sense. And so that's why us and why not.
I mean, Mark and I were at a dinner party, and there was a bit of a Bittensor skeptic there, and he was saying, what is Bittensor without its subnets? And we said Bitcoin, and so Bittensor is Bitcoin plus subnets, and so it's theoretically possible that it becomes a better store of value than Bitcoin. In the early 90s, there were all different kinds of proprietary internets, from AOL's internet to Microsoft's internet, and then everything converged on TCP/IP and Linux. And what if Linux is Bittensor and everything gets built on top of it? You have OpenAI doing a subnet, Google doing a subnet. It's possible. And imagine if Linux or the modern internet itself had a token, and what that would be valued at today. It would be astronomical, tens of trillions of dollars. And so that could play out with Bittensor.
Welcome to the Ventura Labs podcast. Today, we're joined by Mark Jeffries and Rob Greer, the founders of Stillcore Capital, a new hedge fund focused on the Bittensor ecosystem. We dive into their shared vision for decentralized AI, the thesis behind Stillcore Capital, and why they see Bittensor as a transformative opportunity akin to the early years of Bitcoin or Ethereum. They discuss their strategy for investing in TAO and blue chip subnets, the impact of the upcoming halving, and the potential for Bittensor to reshape industries through innovative incentivization. Now, back to Mark and Rob with the 60-second Ventura Labs podcast.
Mark Jeffries, Rob Greer, good to get you guys on today.
Hello, Grant. Thank you for inviting us on. Exciting day.
Yeah, pleasure to be on, man. Huge fan of the pod.
Absolutely. I'm glad to get you guys here. You guys announced today Stillcore Capital. Mark, everybody in the Bittensor ecosystem, I feel like is very familiar with you, knows your face now. Rob, I feel like a lot of people may not know who you are. So if we could just start with who are you, Rob? What do you do?
Yeah, it might be better that way. So my name is Rob Greer, originally from New Jersey, live in Los Angeles now. Mark and I met at a Bittensor meetup a little bit before the Proof of Talk conference here in LA, and very quickly realized that we kind of philosophically were in agreement on a lot of things as it pertains to decentralized AI, and shared the same thesis on Bittensor. But maybe just stepping back on my background, I come from a Wall Street background. I worked in investment banking and private equity prior to becoming an entrepreneur over the last couple of years. But I've been a bit of a AI crazy for most of my life. I came across Ray Kurzweil and The Singularity is Near book for whatever reason when I was in middle school. And so I've kind of been aware of this whole kind of broader macro trend towards AI potentially eclipsing human intelligence within our lifetimes. And, Ray Kurzweil in the 90s went to a Stanford AI conference, and he was laughed out of the room because he said there was going to be general intelligence by 2029. And now it seems like he might actually be conservative on that. And so kind of stumbled across Bittensor right after the Revolution upgrade. Highest conviction thing I've ever invested in my entire life. Saw the DynamicTAO upgrade and realized I wanted to start a fund around this. And Mark and I just met at the right time. And it was very much a 1+1=3 dynamic. And yeah, here we are with Stillcore.
And let's get into Stillcore. Just high level, why did you guys start Stillcore? Why now? Why are you guys the people to do this?
Yeah, I mean, we started it because we think we're in a moment very much like, where Bitcoin was in 2013, or where Ethereum was sort of in its beginning days, but both moments I was around for, as you know, right? So this is really the third time I've seen something where, every molecule of my body is just screaming, this is another just massive opportunity. And, how best to take advantage of it. And the way you force multiply yourself usually, in sort of the startup arena is to raise venture capital, right? And start investing in things to catch a wave. This is the way to raise to catch this wave for Bittensor, right? So, straight up, that's why, right? We believe in it and we think it's a very big thing. So, as Rob said, I've been toying around with the idea of doing some form of a crypto hedge fund for maybe 4 years now, and I just never pulled the trigger on it. And I came close a couple times. And I just felt like I didn't have the background that Rob has, right? Rob comes out of this world, this banking world, right? He's done these things before, and I haven't, right? I've done startups and I've done venture back things, but I haven't done this. And I just felt like there needed to be someone that experience needed to be part of what I was doing. And other people who had proposed partnerships to me before did not have that experience. Their experience mirrored my own. And I just felt, that was not a 1+1=3. That was a 1+1=0.5, right? It was not the same thing. So when Rob came along and we both shared the enthusiasm for Bittensor and every molecule in his body was screaming, oh my God, this is another Bitcoin. It just really made sense. And so that's why us and why now.
Yeah, and I mean, I would echo everything Mark just said. And just thematically from a macro standpoint, crypto, we just had the Genius bill. Stable coins are going to proliferate in a big way over the next couple of years. And I think that will probably mitigate a lot of the debt issues that we're facing in this country in many ways, because we're going to have all this demand for treasuries, which is great. You have the Clarity Act coming. So just from a crypto standpoint, crypto is legal in the United States now. And it feels like the most opportune time to ever be starting a crypto fund, frankly. But then at the same time, we have this AI revolution that is in the first inning of the ball game. And the Mag 7, the United States, China, and the entire world is racing to kind of build out these AI data centers. And it feels like the convergence of those things is going to produce some serious investment opportunities. And, we strongly believe that Bittensor is the pinnacle of what's being built there. And also just like broadly from a crypto standpoint, I mean, I just listened to a podcast from Barry recently, and, Barry Silbert, I think, really articulates the explanation of Bittensor, but also like what its broader vision is. And it does feel like the next major wave, the next narrative for blockchain is crypto and AI. I think a lot of people have this view that crypto's done. We had Bitcoin, we had Ethereum, but my view is actually most of the gains from crypto are actually in the future, not the past. And I believe that Bittensor will be a large driver of those returns. You could think about a world where there is AGI within the next 5 years. That's kind of like the predominant view from Sam Altman, Demis Hassabis, all those guys. My view is that, sentient autonomous AI is going to be using blockchain as the rails for conducting transactions, as opposed to going through our traditional finance system. And so if you accept the view that AI is going to reside, its natural environment is going to be on blockchain, where on blockchain is it going to reside? And I think there's a really good case to be made that will be on Bittensor. So I think like those are kind of like our views on the matter. And as a result, we view this as a massive asymmetric investment opportunity. The world is just clearly not woken up to decentralized AI. And that's reflected in the price of TAO and the market cap of TAO. But also just crypto AI as a category is comically small. It's 20 to 25 billion in market cap. Dog coins are 50, meme coins are 75, and DeFi is 125. And so our view is that crypto AI as a category is going to multiply. And then in terms of the composition of that, BitTensor is going to take a lion's share of it. So that would kind of be our thematic views, I think, or an extension of it.
You guys also have a third partner, Jason Calacanis. How did you manage to get him involved, Mark?
Well, you know that Jason and I are old friends going back to the 90s, for those who don't sort of know our story together. So I was doing a company called The Palace in like 1995 through 2000. Jason was doing a magazine in New York called Silicon Alley Reporter that covered all the early internet startups, of which I was one. And, we met basically, and I was in New York quite a bit in those days because that's where The Palace kind of took off. So I met him and sort of everyone else in the scene in New York. And then later in the 2000s, when he raised money from Sequoia and Elon Musk for a company called Mahalo, he asked me to be CTO. So I was CTO with him on that for about 4 years. And then together we started another company called This Week In, which was a podcast company out of which his very popular podcast, This Week in Startups, came out of. And, ostensibly All In sort of has some genealogies springing off of that as well, right? Because Jason had the infrastructure and the personnel and sort of the system figured out, right, from those efforts. So we've known each other a very long time. Jason, when I came out to Austin for the Bittensor conference that we had, I think it was like, where was it, May, somewhere around there?
Yeah, something like that.
Jason had just moved to Austin not long before. So I called him up. I was like, hey, I'm going to be in town for another thing. Do you want to hang out? And he was like, sure. So we had dinner and he asked me what I was in town for. And I told him about Bittensor. And he said, oh my God, this actually sounds pretty interesting. Now, Jason's not really one to like crypto usually, right? Like historically, he's not been a fan, right? Everybody knows this. But I think he's in a different place now partly because David Sachs, his friend and co-host on the All In podcast, is America's crypto and AI czar. And he's seeing that, crypto's it's starting to gentrify. It's legit. It's legal. The rules have been clarified, right? It's now a different thing than it ever has been before. So Jason sees that, this is a new world of opportunity that just didn't really exist in the same legitimate way before. And so when I told him about Bittensor, I'm like, this is a very serious new thing. In other words, when I say serious, there's AI and crypto things, but a lot of them are sort of dumb meme coin kinds of things, right? It's not sophisticated. It doesn't have sort of the same seriousness ethos, I guess, that startups usually have, where there's serious people doing serious things, right? Versus Eliza the meme coin. Right? Like they're very different things. Whereas Bittensor is serious people doing serious things, and yet crypto underpins it, right? So as I explained how the incentivization engine of Bittensor worked to him, he recognized it as a serious thing, right? In a newly serious industry. And initially I approached him and I said, look, I think we're going to be doing, Rob and I had talked about doing a fund. I said, look, I think we're going to do a fund for Bittensor, for TAO. Do you want to invest? And we'd like to be able to say that you're an investor. And basically came back and said, well, what if I'm a partner with you guys, right? So, which was far better than what we could have ever hoped for, right? Of course,
it was a pleasant development for sure.
Yeah, it was. So of course we said yes, right? Then it was just a question of working out the timing and the details. And in the meantime, I forgot to mention, he had me on his show This Week in Startups, where I explained Bittensor and sort of the subnets and some of the extraordinary things that we're seeing in the subnets on his show to a general sort of tech audience for the very first time. So I was, look, we're super grateful that Jason is interested enough to join us on this journey. And, of course, we're old friends. So once again, we're working together, and I couldn't be more delighted.
And I think the beauty of Stillcore is that, Mark is a bona fide expert in blockchain and crypto, and obviously, by extension, AI, given he's living and breathing Bittensor all day long at this point. But Jason is kind of a major name in the world of AI and technology, kind of more so in the Web 2 context up to this point. And so the composition of Stillcore, crypto expert with Mark, AI and tech expert with Jason, is what Bittensor is. And I think that, among many other reasons is why we're going to be well positioned, not only to raise capital, but deploy it effectively. And I think the benchmark of our success, and we could obviously get into this portfolio construction, subnets versus TAO, et cetera. That's why we expect to and hope to be able to outperform the benchmark of TAO. TAO is essentially the S&P 500. As a hedge fund manager, as a fund manager, you want to outperform the benchmark, and that's our intention.
Okay, that'll be a tall task considering it's a $3 billion market cap currently. You touched on this a little bit earlier with the bet on Bittensor's kind of like betting on the crypto AI sector growing. What would you say is Stillcore's overall investment strategy or investment thesis?
Do you want to kick this one off, Mark, and I could build on it? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, we want to be investing in TAO, obviously, but we want to be investing in subnets. We're still sort of debating what the mix should be. I don't think we want to go any more than 30% into subnets right now because we're sort of in this odd boot up phase where the liquidity is still booting up in the pools. We're not really in true price discovery in a lot of ways, but balanced against the fact that we're sort of also in this magical time that we'll probably look back on and be like, oh my God, Ridge has only had in the tens of millions of market cap. Oh my God, that's crazy, right? So right. I don't think it'll be like I think next year this time, I believe my belief is that those market caps will be very different. And we will look back at this time much like we look back at, the days when Bitcoin was $50 on Mt. Gox, right? As a magical time that, I wish I had a time machine. I could go back to that, right? So you don't want to overextend, but you don't want to underextend either. So I think what we want to do is we want to pick, what look like sort of the blue chip subnets right now and invest somewhat conservatively, but with some aggression, sort of the right mix between those two things. So that when, our bet is that subnets will take off and explode at some point, so that if that bet is right, we're positioned in kind of the top 10, the top 20, something like that, with something like 30% of the stack, kind of as an initial bet. So that's the thinking right now.
Yeah. I mean, it does kind of, from a timing standpoint, feel pretty solid right now. Like prices are directionally $300, which is meaningfully off all-time high. Even from a market cap standpoint, it's meaningfully off all-time high. And then DTAO too. I mean, to some extent, there's blood in the streets, and that's when you want to be deploying capital, which is the old adage of Warren Buffett, obviously. And I think there are like two main deltas that come to mind for me as we think about like investing in Bittensor. One is, when I first entered the ecosystem, there were barely any subnets, and we were lucky to have one major development or update on Twitter per week. And now there's just a tsunami every single day. But despite that, now we have obviously 128 subnets. The fundamentals have exploded for Bittensor over the last 18 months, but the price hasn't moved. And so one, I think there's going to be a spring back point, and it's going to be volcanic at some point when the world wakes up to what's being built here. Maybe there's a deep seek moment within the Bittensor ecosystem, and, name your subnet for which candidate that's going to be. At some point, the world is going to wake up to it. And then secondly, I think another delta is the delta between decentralized AI valuations and centralized AI valuations. Bittensor is at $3 billion of market cap, and the largest subnet market cap is, less than 100 million. In shoots or ridges, and I think it's like 70 or something like that. If you compare that to their centralized counterparts, the difference in valuation is astounding. And that is just a classic case of information asymmetry. Bittensor is just tough to explain. And Barry talks about this all the time. You ask 10 people and you get 15 different explanations for it. And I think that's one of the many reasons that explains why Bittensor is where it is from a market cap standpoint. But yeah, I mean, at some point, people are going to catch on to this in a big way. But in terms of why would we even start a hedge fund around Bittensor? I feel like the nature of Bittensor really lends itself to a hedge fund strategy, because you have, call it the digital land of this new kind of digital AI economy that's being built, and that's TAO. And obviously, we want to hold that as a reserve asset, but you have all of these developments that are getting built on top of that land as well in the form of these subnets, and all of them have their own alpha token. And it's going to expand dramatically in the coming years. We're currently at 128 with $1 billion USD of annual emissions. But as the price of tau goes up, potentially driven by the halving and other catalysts, the emissions pie is going to grow significantly. And I think there's just going to be a flood of talent and innovation, such that we get to, an S&P 500 of subnets in a couple of years, and then ultimately many thousands, all of which are collaborating and cross-pollinating together. And, for a family office to invest in Bittensor, you would need a full team dedicated exclusively to tau and Bittensor to really be able to play this space. And so, that's why we're focusing exclusively on this ecosystem. I think there's abundant opportunity now and in the future.
And what is the strategy for you guys to go out and raise capital? Will it look like a traditional hedge fund, or will it be you guys go on and find tau investors and they give you their tau to manage?
I could kick this one off, and then Mark, would love for you to jump in too. But I think the most accurate description of what Stillcore is actually liquid venture. So venture capital, and that, this is a long-term thesis that decentralized AI is going to play a role in the future of AI. In fact, the entire future of AI might be decentralized if it plays out like the internet played out. In the early 90s, there were all different kinds of proprietary internets, from AOL's internet to Microsoft's internet, and then everything converged on TCP/IP and Linux. And what if Linux is Bittensor and everything gets built on top of it? You have OpenAI doing a subnet, Google doing a subnet. It's possible. And imagine if Linux or the modern internet itself had a token, and what that would be valued at today. It would be astronomical, tens of trillions of dollars. And so that could play out with Bittensor. But in terms of like the fundraising itself, I think our value proposition will resonate with, ultra high net worth individuals, entrepreneurs that have had successful exits and have a risk tolerance, family offices, and ultimately, fund of funds, and ultimately maybe graduating to more institutional investors, sovereign capital money. People that understand that this is an asymmetric opportunity. Bittensor could not work out, and there's a loss of capital there. But in the upside scenario, you could have a return that's on par with Ethereum or even Bitcoin. Bitcoin was $3 billion in 2012, 2013. ETH was at that price level in 2016, and you have that kind of return potential with Bittensor too. And that's what we're hoping plays out.
Yeah, Grant. So this is something that a lot of people just don't think about. It's really hard for normal people to get into Bittensor, right?
Yeah.
Like never mind anything fancy, just getting tau and putting it into a tau wallet. That's like witchcraft. That's sorcery to most people on Earth, right? And I know this because I've helped some of my friends do it, and it's just like, oh my god, it's so hard, right? Because it's even if you want to give it, and if you want to help them put it into a hardware wallet, it's like a whole nother thing, right? So sure, you can go buy it on Coinbase and just leave it in your Coinbase account, but you don't want to leave your crypto on any exchange, right? So not that, but anything sort of north of that's really hard. If you go with Stillcore, right, we take care of the custody for you. That worry, that headache goes away. We take care of, the fiat to tau and tau back out. That worry goes away. All the paperwork, all the tax paperwork, that worry goes away. There's a lot of things that just sort of food and shelter things that come with us. On top of that, Bittensor is a highly difficult to understand, highly fluid situation in terms of the subnets. There's like new stuff coming out every day, and you really have to have someone who's living and breathing and just, their life is that, in order to take advantage of the opportunities which are going to arise in that space if this thesis is correct, right? So you're not going to be able to do that most likely if you have trouble just figuring out how to put tau in your tau wallet, right? Like that's like a different person, right? So that's where we come in. That's the value that we're going to add. So yeah, I think that covers it. Rob,
Yeah, I mean, I think just to distill it down, right? It's passive, and we expect to be able to outperform the benchmark of tau itself, and we're using institutional custody. So the anchorages, the BitGos of the world, as opposed to a hotkey or even a cold wallet. And so that's kind of the value proposition to a family office, for example. They might say, why don't I just invest in tau? Well, just as like a family office might invest in the S&P 500 index, they do allocate some of their capital to a hedge fund manager that they do believe is well positioned to outperform the benchmark. And I think the case can be made that, we're positioned to do that. Mark is a true expert on Bittensor, and he has connectivity to all of these different subnet teams along with all the developments happening on a day-to-day basis. And so we have more information. I mean, I think we have, incredible information to inform our investment decisions. And, we'll be acting on that.
Word on the street is multiple people have said this number. You guys can say if it's true or not. You're targeting to raise a fund of over 1% of supply. That means 210,000 TAO. Is this true? False? What should I think of that number?
Well, you got that number from me because I tweeted it earlier today. Yes. So the answer is yes. That is our target. That is what we aspire to. Own 1% of liquid supply. So not like the full, not like the full 21 million, but 1% of whatever is liquid, the 9.5 million or whatever it is right now. 1% of that and growing, right? Never let it shrink, which is exactly what the Winklevi did with Bitcoin, right? That was their early strategy as well. Now, will we get there? Don't know. I mean, I'm optimistic, but I can't say for sure that we're definitely going to get there. We're sure as hell going to try. So, but yes, you got that number from me.
Yeah. So around the time of the halving, there's directionally 10.5 million TAO in circulation. So that would be about 105,000 TAO. And at current price levels, that would cost us about $35 million. But, this is a 506c fund, meaning, we're marketing this publicly to accredited investors, and it's open-ended. So this is going to be a perpetual fundraise so long as we have conviction in Bittensor. So we're going to be raising forever. And yeah, I mean, Mark and Jason, and to some extent myself, we have some pretty deep Rolodexes, and we are going to town on the fundraising as we speak. Onboarding our first investors, bought our first TAO out of the fund last week. There's a lot of work to get it to this point, but this is where the real work begins, honestly.
Yep.
And what is the timeline that you guys will be trading on as a hedge fund?
I think overarching, we want to deploy as much capital as we possibly can at current price levels, especially in advance of the halving. After Bitcoin's halving, it did an 80x over, I think, the subsequent 12 to 18 months. The market cap was lower than what Bittensor is currently, but there is going to be a supply shock here that we ultimately think translates to a higher TAO price, even independent of what happens with subnets and kind of the broader macro environment. But this is a long-term thesis, and we're going to be buying TAO for the foreseeable future, certainly as long as it has a 3-digit handle on it. And we'll kind of just be viewing this as, building our portfolio. The goal is to build a maximum TAO bag over the next few years. So we will opportunistically buy and opportunistically sell TAO and subnets, but we are long-term holders, and the goal is to build the maximum TAO bag over a multi-year period.
You guys have mentioned throughout the conversation blue chip subnets. What defines a blue chip subnet, in your opinion?
Go ahead, Mark.
No, I mean, it's a great question, right? And the real answer is we're still figuring that out, right? There's a lot of people that have sort of different theses on that. I have some ideas. James Altucher has some ideas. I would define it as subnets that appear to have a strategy for their alpha token valuation, A. You look at that alpha token and you think, yeah, it could reach realistically $1 billion market cap, just the alpha token alone with circulating supply. That's like not insane. And there are some comparables to that out in the real world. And you look at Ridges and you look at Anthropic, right? Anthropic is got, I don't know what their valuation is, but it's been the billions, right?
183 billion. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like insane. Right. So, and then you have something like Ridges, which I haven't checked it recently, but I think it's like around 30 million or something like that. Maybe 40 million.
Maybe, yeah, something like that. 50,
I haven't
60,
checked it today,
yeah.
but it's something like that.
Something in that ballpark.
Yeah. So,
Tiny.
And Ridges is showing some early promise in the sense that it is beating Anthropic on the SWE benchmark test. And they've invested less than $1 million into their product, which is doing better than Anthropic's product, right? Now, they don't have the front end built for it yet. They don't have a product. They're not in the market. So have they proven their point to the world at large? Not yet. In the lab, though, their engine, even though there's not a car built around it, their engine, when you rev it, it's testing better than the world's best engine in the world's best car, right? So I look at that and I say, well, that there's enough signal there that it appears that that is a blue chip subnet. And I think everyone would agree largely in the BitTensor space that Ridges does look like the prime candidate to be the breakout subnet. Now, will it be? Don't know yet. They're going to have to productize it in such a way that all these people that are using Claude, right? There's all these end product consumer niceties built into Claude, like it integrates into the software development environment in a way that they all are used to, and it's seamless and very easy. I don't know that the BitTensor equivalent of that will compete effectively as a consumer product. That remains to be seen. But there's enough signal that we suspect that that's true, right? So I think that's one example. There are others. I mean, if you look at Shoots or Targon, they're essentially serving up AI models for 1/10 the cost of what you could serve them up on AWS or comparable services. And there you can just compare apples to apples. It's the same thing for 1/10 of the cost, right? So that looks like pretty good signal. Has the world at large woken up to that? Well, on some benchmarks, yes. For their free models of DeepSeek, right there, if you go to Open Router, they are typically right at the top of the charts for the free models. They have not yet proven their point yet on the paid models, but I think they're going to, right? So it's still really early days on all of these things, but there's enough signal there that I would call both Target and Shoots blue chips. There are others that I like for various reasons that are, there's similar signal on other subnets for different but similar reasons, right? Like that they are in fact performing in such a way that indicates that in the future they are going to be very significant players in BitTensor. But so far, nobody has really broken out yet. Nobody has had a DeepSeek moment yet, but I think that's coming.
Yeah, I mean, what is the archetype of a good subnet or a blue chip subnet? I think the beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and we're not the arbiter of truth for that. But like, I think we do have kind of like a framework by which we're evaluating these subnets in terms of like, whether or not we're going to deploy capital into them. You could kind of cut the BitTensor subnet landscape into many different ways. So if you have the S&P 500, you have the healthcare sector, you have the tech sector, you have industrials, you have oil and gas, et cetera. In BitTensor, you have decentralized training and fine tuning, drug discovery, sports prediction, data scraping, and, various other, really compelling use cases. So that's one way to look at it. And then I think there's also like the deep tech ones. So there's decentralized training with Templar and IOTA. And I think what they're doing is phenomenal. If they are able to train a frontier model in a decentralized fashion using heterogeneous compute, that would be a DeepSeek moment. That happens. That's Wall Street Journal. That's on the news, on TV, and, BitTensor is multiplying in price. But in terms of like, I think what we're most interested in investing in is path to visibility. Like there's a clear path to revenue visibility. And so, for example, with Ridges, they've really built out the tech underpinning. It seems as though they're going to be positioned to build out a really well-functioning application that generates revenue and competes with Claude, Cursor, and some of those other comparable kind of centralized AI platforms. I think, there's various other subnets that have that ability. But I think it's important that they're able to generate fiat revenue, and whether they use that to buy back their alpha token or use that to hypercharge growth, I think that is important as opposed to just relying exclusively on tau emissions. And I also, some people are worrying about the halving and what effect that's going to have on the US dollar value of emissions flowing to these subnets. I kind of view DTAO as having its own little bit of a recession right now. And if you look back to 2009, 2010, the best companies in the world are built during recessions when times are not easy. And that is clearly what has characterized the BitTensor ecosystem in the last few months, last year for that matter. But it's also instilled this kind of fiscal discipline where it's very much sink or swim. Like you need to demonstrate a viable business model where you're going to be able to generate revenue independent of TAO emissions. Otherwise you're going to sink. And if TAO is already sitting at 3,000 and the emissions pool is 10x what it is right now, it would be a much lazier landscape, I think, because everyone would be flush with emissions. So I think it's indirectly a good thing. And I think we're going to get that 10x in price. But at that point, the subnets are going to know how to generate real world revenue. And it's going to be very good.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that. There's a lot of theses on what a subnet should do to instill value into their alpha token. But one of the interesting points that James Altucher made recently was that if you look at the subnets, like, do they have employees? Well, some of them have a few employees, but the bulk of their employees are the temps that are the miners inside of their subnet, the 256 people who are working for them for free to produce, to do the bulk of the labor to produce the digital commodity that they then turn around and resell to somebody else, right? So you got to keep these people happy. And the way you keep them happy is with the alpha token price, right? Ultimately. So whatever they do, they have to find some way to drive value into that alpha token. Now, the simplest way is to just buy it, right? Make revenue over here, use that revenue to go buy the alpha tokens off the market. That's certainly one answer, but there are more sophisticated answers now emerging. For example, Hippias just did a really great revenue search where one of their answers is the miners have to stake subnet tokens, right? So to mine, right? So they're basically finding ways to pull alpha tokens off of the market and in fact make them a requirement, and then further find ways to further incentivize the miners. You know, they do that with one hand, and then they create more incentives on the other hand. And I'm still in the middle of going through it. I was just watching it right before this, but it was the first time I had heard someone say, you know, we're going to make the miners stake alpha tokens. So there's all this different creative thinking going on, and I think somebody's going to crack the template here pretty soon, and all the other subnets are going to go like, oh, okay, that's how you do it. But the idea is to basically build another Bittensor inside a Bittensor inside the subnet. You got to get the incentivization engines aligned, right? And I think that's going to get cracked.
Yeah, and like we're just building on right now. But I at least my personal opinion is that they don't need to be repurchasing the alpha tokens, but I do think it's important that they're focusing on generating fiat revenue. Because if you just think about like the traditional finance context, if a company like Apple is repurchasing their stock, that implies that they don't have a better use for that capital. They're not going to be investing it into other things. And so some might say that it's concerning that subnet teams are repurchasing their alpha token because they're unable to kind of deploy that in a higher returning fashion across the rest of the business to kind of grow the business. So, I mean, to Mark's point, I don't think there's a clear answer for it. I think it's going to be specific to each subnet, but I do think like there is this framework developing, and ultimately, I think that discovery process will lead to kind of some standards that the ecosystem could use to build upon.
What is your guys' opinion on the idea Shaquille from Ridges floated of the alpha to equity conversion, where you can take the alpha and buy a special class of shares? They get like 49% of the revenue.
Yeah, I think he might be wading into some bad waters with that, because that brings up some questions with the SEC. I'm not a lawyer, so I wouldn't be able to address that, but it does seem like the sort of thing that it could get sketchy pretty quickly. I don't think we want to live in a universe where the tokens of a subnet actually become equity in some fashion, because it's not equity, it's something else. It functions as incentivization like equity does, but it is not equity. You don't actually own a piece of the company, right? So, and I think a lot of these questions are mirroring the early days of Ethereum, right? We had the whole utility token thesis for a while during right after the ICO phase, right? When you own Uniswap Uni tokens, do you own a piece of Uniswap? No, you own the Uni token, right? What is that? Well, it's kind of a meme coin for Uniswap, the protocol, right? You can use it in governance votes, but does anyone really do that? Not really, right? And yet there's still sort of a value ascribed to it because of its association with Uniswap. I actually think the theses that are building up in the Bittensor universe for the subnet tokens are quite a bit better, and they're finding much better ways to sort of infuse value into the alpha tokens, and the evolution is happening quite a bit faster than we ever saw in the Ethereum universe, right? So, but I think, I think the Ridges guys got to be a little careful. I think this is a young person's. I think it's an interesting idea, but I think ultimately it's a dead end because it wades into dangerous territory. Just
Yeah,
my
I
own
don't
opinion.
I don't hate the idea and concept, kind of just coming from that kind of private equity world. I could see why people are centering in on that, and I could see why traditional capital, family offices, sovereign wealth funds would ask that question. And frankly, I've been posed that question just in the context of our fundraising. Regulations aside, it could make sense if there was a way to figure that out. And I do kind of get, I was talking to an investor recently, and they're basically saying, well, I think it's trickier when there's an alpha token and then there's a separate cap table that's raising venture capital. And there are a couple examples of subnets where that's the case. And, one might say, well, what happens if the subnet team neglects their alpha token to the benefit of the venture capital investors? The response would be the market is going to sell off that alpha token if the subnet owners don't care about accruing value to it. And then their emissions are going to fall off a cliff. So they do have that incentive to make sure that the alpha token is being treated properly. Another example would be, what if Google comes in and buys a subnet and they buy the real world equity? That doesn't benefit any of the alpha token holders. And I would say, yeah, not directly, but if Google buys a subnet, for sure that alpha token is going to pump, and probably in multiples. So there's just, it's very much like there's no real precedent set. We're wading into uncharted waters, but I think the market's going to figure this out at some point. And, hopefully we play a role in that.
Another topic that you brought up earlier, Rob, was you related Bittensor to the S&P 500 and equated some subnets to having like sectors. Are there any specific sectors that you think are best fit for Bittensor, or sectors that have not yet arrived to Bittensor that you think are well suited for Bittensor?
Mark, I don't know if you want to jump in on this, but I think we're really just limited only by the ability to create a proper incentive. And so, obviously AI broadly has been a logical use case, but this by no means has to be limited to AI. And there's plenty of subnets outside of AI that are really doing quite well. I think it's going to be really interesting. Like right now, I think the main dynamic with subnets is new teams with new ideas, building new subnets with new incentive mechanisms. But I am looking forward to the day when Web 2 AI companies with proven business models and real world users and revenue already are plugging into Bittensor, because the miners and the incentive design are an upgrade over their current business model. And I do think that world is going to come soon enough. And so that'll be really intriguing. But, Mark, I don't know if you want to jump in on anything else. Oh, the last thing I would say too is, like, I do have a friend, Austin, here in LA, and I'll give him a plug. But he's launching his subnet soon, and it's focused around incentivized AI alignment. And I think that's going to be really interesting for the ecosystem to get. Basically, a subnet that is figuring out a way to ensure that AI is aligned with the best interest of humans, and using Bittensor to do that. It's really cool.
Could you repeat the question? I just want to make sure I'm answering it correctly, because I didn't quite catch it.
What subnet sectors do you think are best suited for Bittensor that either are currently here or may not even exist yet? What do you think fits the best for Bittensor?
Yeah, I think, the one that's sort of popped up out of nowhere that totally surprised me, and actually I didn't believe in it at all at first, was Bitcast. Right now, Bitcast, right? So, Bitcast, they actually approached me on X, and they said, "Hey, so we're doing this thing called Bitcast. It's sort of this, nouveau Bittensor advertising network. Although they called it something else. It was basically, the idea is that they tell you what they want to see in a video produced, right? They sort of give you the general outline of a script, and someone has paid them to sort of disperse this script to all of the Bittensor miners, which are video producers, right? It's not even AI, right? Like, you're like, what does that have to do with AI? Oh, nothing, zero, right? And the idea is that the chain, the Bittensor chain, and the subnet owners are incentivizing all of these video producers to produce videos to a current standard. And then they have AI check to see whether you actually produced the video that adhered to the guidelines, right? And if you did, then you as a miner, you get some TAO, right? And really it's subnet tokens, which is rehypothecated TAO, but you get emissions from the chain. And at first I didn't believe in this idea at all. I was like, this is dumb. This is not AI. Like, I don't get it. But then I actually participated in it. I started producing videos with them. I just tried it out. And all of a sudden it clicked. I was like, oh my God, I don't have to go out and get advertisers for hash rate, right? Once they started adding advertisers in, I can just go and pull an ad down off of the Bitcast network, produce it. The AI checks to see whether I produce it correctly, right? They don't have to have a human go and check. And they can basically have hundreds of thousands of humans all producing these ads in these little videos. All the checking of who did what is automated. On my end, I don't have to sell ads against my podcast. That's all automated. The chain is subsidizing with TAO emissions the payment of the content producers. This like just the efficiency that Bitcast brings to this process is absolutely insane. It gets rid of all these middlemen or middle people, right? And I that was very surprising. And if they can basically make a new way for podcast advertising to flourish with lots of little creators, that is going to be incredibly lucrative, right? So I think they're onto something. And I think there's more little pockets of things like that hasn't occurred to anyone yet.
Couple incremental thoughts, because I realize I did not answer your question at all directly. But as I think about like what are gaps in what subnets can be doing, one, I think we should just be doing more of what we're doing, because that's a natural economy. There should be many competitors for each use case, because that encourages everyone to do better. Because what Const and Ala and the Bittensor team have managed to produce here is a form of digital capitalism. And so we should have ruthless competition. And that is what allows us to kind of compete. It's kind of a race to the bottom on price, which is ultimately, I think, what the vision for Bittensor is in many ways: deflationary, cheap, and democratized AI. But like, what are the industries of the future? I mean, Mark is an avid proponent of humanoid robots. I know a serial investor in that space. Why can't we have a humanoid robot, maybe not like bridging the world of bits and atoms quite yet. I mean, by all means, someone might do that, but like humanoid robot models like NVIDIA is building, nuclear fusion, brain computer interfaces. We have quantum subnets now. It is above my pay grade to think about what kind of subnet that would look like, but it does feel like, those industries will converge on Bittensor at some point in the future. And then I think there's like horizontal extensions to what's already working. Ridges is crushing it with the SUI benchmark, but all of white collar labor, whether that's lawyers, consultants, investment bankers, accountants, there's going to be benchmarks for each of those different professions. That is what Web2 agent companies are doing right now. Let's create a benchmark on what a 100th percentile accountant would look like, and then let's use AI to saturate that benchmark. And they're going to do that systematically across all white collar labor. And that's going to completely disrupt all white collar labor over the next 3 to 5 years. But why can't there be a Ridges copy and paste for accounting or for legal or for any of those other roles? I think that could obviously be something that people do as well.
The inter-subnet competition, more subnets doing the same thing. You're the first person I've ever heard advocate for that. Most people are saying we need to compete with the outside world. What makes you?
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, it was just, what's your thought process behind that?
I'm a believer in capitalism, man. And I don't believe in monopolies. That's why I'm investing in Bittensor, because, monopolies are lazy. Monopolies don't have competition, and you don't have the incentive to innovate and change the world in the absence of competition. So more competition is better. I think that's kind of like a core tenet of capitalism. But I don't like espouse the view that decentralized AI and centralized AI have to be at war with each other. And I think, this is one topic of discussion at the Proof of Talk conference with some people in the ecosystem. Why can't there be a very amicable marriage between those two things? All of the Mag 7 is built on top of Linux, which is open source, right? So clearly there is a mutually beneficial marriage happening between closed source and open source in the internet context. I don't think it has to be combative. I think it could be synergistic. Like you could think about a world where like, everyone is compute constrained right now. NVIDIA is selling out of their GPUs as much as they could produce them. And so if OpenAI is compute constrained, whether that's on the training of their models or the inference of their models, why couldn't they plug into Manifold and get some excess compute in a way that's synergistic for both of those entities? OpenAI could build their own subnet if they really are trying to lean into open source in the wake of DeepSeek. Why couldn't they use Bittensor to kind of forward their efforts in that category? I think seeking to collaborate with centralized AI and figuring out going to Silicon Valley and teaching people about Bittensor, I think that's the right approach. And I think to some extent that's what we're hoping to do with Stillcore and with Jason.
Both of you guys were in Bittensor pre-DynamicTAO upgrade. What would you say are the most notable things that have happened since DynamicTAO went live, now that we're coming up on a year into it?
Mark, you've been longer in the ecosystem than me. Do you want to jump in
I'm trying to think
first?
how to answer that.
Just anything noteworthy since DTAL has came that you think is important that maybe people haven't caught?
Not about DTAO itself. I think it's just the innovation around how alpha token value is created, and I think we're still in the middle of it. So I don't think we know where it ends up yet. I don't think we know what the answer is, but there's quite a lot of furious thinking and activity. And I will say that, like, look, when DTAO launched, like, I didn't know much about a lot of the subnets, right? I sort of talked to a few of them, but the launch of DTAO forced me to learn at like a greatly accelerated pace, right? All of us did, right? All of a sudden we knew kind of what everybody was doing, right? And so I think, yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's just the consciousness expansion that DTAO sort of forced on everyone who was in the ecosystem, and the knowledge expansion and the conversations between people in the space and between the subnets that went exponential. So honestly, I think that's probably the biggest development.
Yeah, I mean, I think subnets getting their own tokens allowed for a world where Stillcore could exist, because one of our main value propositions is that we're investing in the individual subnet tokens. So because Stillcore is allowed to exist, we are bringing in kind of institutional capital into the ecosystem. And so I think that was a major upgrade to make this appealing to institutional investors seeking to get exposure to the cutting edge of decentralized AI startups. That's what Barry and DCG and Yuma are doing as well, creating that institutional bridge. Obviously the subnet innovation has been incredible since DTAO and prior to DTAO, but there's also like the infrastructure being built around Bittensor as well. So like there's like a Crunchbase for Bittensor coming, and then there is a Shark Tank Kickstarter for Bittensor coming, and there's Tau.app, which JJ is doing. There's Tau Stats, and then also there's all the bridges for capital to flow into the ecosystem are getting built rapidly as well. So you have, I believe you could buy subnet tokens like shitcoins on Solana using Jupiter. You could buy subnet tokens there now. I believe you could buy subnet tokens on Base, and then soon by extension Coinbase, they'll be located there. And then in terms of the institutional rails, I mean, we could say for certain that all of the main institutional custody solutions are racing to build out Bittensor friendly infrastructure, not just Tau, but also the subnets, because all of the quote unquote smart money is asking, what is Tau? The family office is, what is Tau? And so the rails are being built here, and it's just a matter of time before, that capital flows over those rails. And, there's some pretty juicy price action.
What do you guys think will be the effects of the halving on subnets and sum of subnets and subnet prices? How do you think the halving will affect those things?
Yeah, I think there was a fear that, and I've heard this from subnet owners, that, oh my God, the halvening will chop off our subsidies, right? Because if you think about right now, all the miners, right, in the subnets, they're making, what they make is the emissions from the subnet, right? And if oh my god, everybody's going to be paid half of what they were paid before, which means my subnet's going to die, right? So that is not what's going to happen, right? So it's the way this whole thing works is rather complex. The liquidity pools in which tau is emitted in this sort of like chain internal Uniswap that Bittensor has, the proportionality of the emissions into that pool of tau and subnet tokens, which are called injections, I should use the proper term, injections, that ratio will remain the same. So in other words, there was a fear that, oh my God, all of a sudden half the tau is going to be produced, but it's still going to be the same amount of the subnet token injected. That's not what's going to happen. The ratios remain the same. If the halving produces an effect like Bitcoin's, theoretically, the price of tau should push up, right? Now with Bitcoin, whenever there was a halving, in sort of the first 2 or 3, it was about a 10x jump. That's what I remember from sort of watching it since 2013 or so. I don't know if it'll be a 10x jump here, but I think it'll be a doubling, something like that is my guess. And I think that's a reasonable guess based on what Bitcoin did and based on the fact that the tokenomics are largely the same between Bitcoin and Bittensor. And if that happens, that should, more than make up for, basically everybody should be okay if that happens. So my guess is that that's what'll happen and everything will more or less stay the same.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any incremental thoughts there. What I can say is we'll be buying regardless of what happens, whether it's a feast or a famine. And if we believe we're buying Bitcoin at $300 right now.
Do you think it flips Bitcoin?
That's a loaded question. Mark knows Bitcoin way better than I do.
I'm going to say no.
He's written 2 books on it. I have some views on it.
I'm obviously a massive Bittensor bull, but I don't. And I've heard JJ and other people say, "Oh yeah, we're gonna eventually we flip Bitcoin." Maybe, but I personally don't see that. I think it's closer to something like Ethereum. I think the dynamic is very Ethereum-like in terms of its utility. Now, if what Rob just said earlier in this podcast, the rails upon which all of OpenAI, if everything becomes OpenAI, and I don't mean the company, I mean the phenomenon of truly OpenAI,
right,
and it does end up being built on Bittensor rails, then yes, it will absolutely flip in Bitcoin because that'll be a much bigger world. I don't know if that'll happen. I think we're going to end up somewhere in the middle where there's a mix of the centralized versus the decentralized.
Yeah.
But it's not impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's within the realm of possibility. It's not zero. That's for sure. And I think Barry went on a podcast and said, this could be as transformational as Bitcoin. Just a quick anecdote. I mean, Mark and I were at a dinner party and there was a bit of a Bittensor skeptic there. And he was saying, what is Bittensor without its subnets? And we said Bitcoin, and so Bittensor is Bitcoin plus subnets. And so, it's theoretically possible that it becomes a better store of value than Bitcoin. Some people might say that Bitcoin is digital gold and the TAM is, that of gold, 18, 19 trillion dollars right now at current price levels or maybe beyond. And so, some might say that Bittensor is building an entire digital economy that could be worth many multiples of digital gold. And I do share Mark's view that if the AI world converges on decentralized and Bittensor is that phenomenon, then I think it's absolutely possible that it would flip Bitcoin. But again, we're not underwriting to that, but it's possible.
Okay. Hey, that's all I needed to hear. Mark's becoming a little more bullish. He says it's possible now. That's all I need to hear.
Well, I mean, I've always said, I don't think I've ever said it was impossible, but I think I've been pretty consistent in my view on this podcast or other podcasts and hash rate, and maybe even here. I don't remember whether I said this here or not, in that I view it as very much like sort of an Ethereum-like phenomenon, and translating that into numbers, that's like 500 billion. Let's say Bitcoin goes to 10 trillion, right? I think then Bittensor at 1 trillion is completely realistic. I don't think that's out of the question.
Yeah. I mean, I could paint a picture around this. Okay. So quantum computing and breaking SHA-256 is accelerated because of AGI or superintelligence, and Bitcoin isn't able to upgrade itself in time. But Bittensor is able to because it's still somewhat centralized. Or, I agree with Mark, it is it is an Ethereum dynamic, but I would argue it's way better because you could only buy the alpha token, you could only buy the subnet tokens by buying Tau first. And so Bittensor truly is a sum of the parts, whereas Ethereum is not. And so if you agree that, the subnets and Bittensor are going to go to thousands, if not tens of thousands in the future, Bittensor will be the sum of the parts of all of that innovation, all of that market cap that is being built. So who knows if it supplants Ethereum or Bitcoin, but this is going to play a major role within crypto. Top 10 for sure, in our view, I think.
That I feel
Rob,
pretty certain of.
You kind of already answered the question I was going to ask you exactly here. And that is, what aspects of Bittensor and or decentralized AI have you guys most excited for the future?
Well, let me take that.
You go first, Mark. Yeah.
There's something that's been bouncing around in my brain for the last few days. I saw a video recently where Const, Jacob Steves, who's one of the founders of Bittensor, he said that if you look at Ethereum, it looked at the smart contract aspects of Bitcoin, and it expanded in that direction, expanded the smart contract capabilities. Whereas Bittensor looked at Bitcoin and said, let's expand the rewards and the computation side of that, right? So sort of more like how it mines, right, and how it gives out rewards, and let's make that expansive and programmable. And to me, that is what opened the door to the incentivization alignment engine, which is really what Bittensor is, right? Yes, it's about AI, but at its core, it's really about incentivization. And it's applicable mostly to AI right now, but as we've seen with things like Bitcast, it doesn't have to be. It can, it can align incentives around things that have nothing to do with AI. And I think that is extreme power. And I think as more time passes, just that core capability, that core generalization of the lesson of Bitcoin is going to be the most exciting thing that we see happening over time. And I think most of that will still be AI, but I think there'll be a lot of other surprising things in there as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that excite me about Bittensor. I think the prospect of AI actually being open AI for sure. I don't relish the prospect of super intelligence or general intelligence being monopolized and used for profit by a small kind of group of elites at, Fortune 5, at the Mag 7 or the Chinese Communist Party. I think, AI is the most important technological innovation in the history of humanity. This is a once in a humanity event. And, I think it should be a gift for the collective of humanity and owned by all of humanity. In a world where there is, AGI soon or ASI soon, you could imagine, subnets being entirely comprised of AI and miners being AI themselves, right? If Bittensor goes to many thousands of subnets, it's going to be really cool to see kind of like the cross collaboration and cross pollination of all those different subnets together. And you're already starting to see that, right? Like, I think, Manifold is powering Dippy subnet 11. And then I think Ridges to some extent is leveraging Shoots. And this has a compounding deflationary effect on the price of AI, right? Because you're getting a huge discount with Manifold. You're getting a huge discount with Shoots. And then you're getting a huge discount with Ridges. And so the price of the underlying AI just completely falls off a cliff. And I think that is good for the collective of humanity. For the price of intelligence to go to zero, I think we are going to be entering a new renaissance. And I think it's hard to overstate how good that will be as long as we get things right here.
The law of subnet stacking is what I call what Rob just said, right? So
that's easier.
Trademark me, but yes, that's what I call it. So yeah, you have compounding cost savings. If Shoots is 1/10 the cost of everything else, and Ridges is 1/10 the cost, right? That's 1/10 times 1/10. That's 1/100th, right? And if you keep stacking, that you these costs just keep going down, right? Like it's insane what is possible here and so like how does that happen, right? And the reason why is because the Bittensor the Bittensor chain is subsidizing each one of those subnets, right? And before you say, oh, well, that's not real, that's just money printing. Well, that's exactly what Bitcoin does. None of the miners in Bitcoin are getting paid, and yet the miners are donating GPU, CPU, and electricity to run the Bitcoin network, and they're getting rewarded in these things called Bitcoins. So the subsidies the chain is just printing Bitcoins and sending them to the miners, right? So, and what did that do? Well, that produced 3 trillion worth of value, and it created Earth's largest supercomputer. By the nearest supercomputer is 1/500th the power of the Bitcoin network, right? So it succeeded incredibly well. So what Bittensor said is, let's take that lesson of how Bitcoin was built and apply it generally into multiple domains. That's what Bittensor is, and it's the same dynamic, just extended into all these different realms. Most of them AI at the moment, but it can be other things as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at any publicly traded Bitcoin mining company or equity research analyst, or if you're looking at investing in the stock, they have revenue, and that revenue is fundamentally Bitcoin emissions. And so, yes, Bittensor isn't as universally recognized or approved of like Bitcoin is, but I think you could hold it to the same standard. And all currency is just a story, including fiat. And if enough people believe in it, that's what fundamentally gives it value. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that's I think what Mark said is, I would echo that completely.
Well, one last question here today for you guys on this historic day where you launched Stillcore Capital. Congratulations on that, by the way. What advice do you guys have for investors looking to deploy capital into the Bittensor ecosystem, into subnets, evaluating subnets? What advice do you have for these people?
Well, I mean, I'd say come talk to us, but beyond that, I would say you got to, I mean, watch the podcast, watch Hash Rate, watch Ventura, watch Revenue Search. You have to understand what's going on in this universe, in this ecosystem, who the personalities are, what the projects are doing, how these things work. It's very complex. It's highly dynamic. And if that's not for you, then find someone to do it for you, or just invest in Tau. Go to Coinbase, buy some Tau, and sit on it. And it's not financial advice, but you did ask me what my opinion would be in that circumstance. That's what it would be.
Yeah, I mean, AI is the future, and some would say the future of humanity is going to be kind of the intersection of AI and humans. And I think you should be investing in that future. And if you think about like what investment options you have at your disposal right now, you could buy Anthropic at $183 billion market cap. You could buy OpenAI at $500 billion. You could buy NVIDIA at $4.3 trillion. Or you could buy the frontier, the gold standard of decentralized AI for $3 billion at the Tau level and sub $100 million at the subnet level. I think it's just an incredible opportunity. And I think we'll look back in 5 years and just say like a spray and pray approach into Tau really yielded some serious dividends. But yeah, I think, especially in a world where there is significant white collar job dislocation and people are losing their jobs, I think people are going to look to invest in things like Tau because that's kind of it's the future. But yeah, to Mark's point, if folks are interested, we're happy to take a conversation and kind of share our view over and above what we kind of articulated in this podcast.
Well, Rob, Mark, always a pleasure. Thank you guys for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you so much.